Asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I'll have my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Math fire, math evil, scheming, this is no drill. Haters masking boosted, but still with no chill. Need to come and take it if you wanna mess with my hill. We've been 3D printing, setting ready for that ghost kill.
Hello, Canada, and welcome to another episode of the Maple Pill. We've made it 30 episodes deep so far. Appreciate you guys coming along with me on this journey. As always, I'm your host, Matt McKeever, and we've got a lot to cover tonight. But before I even jump into any of the stories we're going to cover tonight, I'll be updating you on what's going on with the trucker convoy protest. We'll be talking about the Emergencies Act further. We've also got, what appears to be real terrorism occurring in Canada as we saw a pipeline blown up and employees at a site in BC essentially intimidated and arguably attacked, depending upon which side of the narrative you're following. But I think the biggest thing that I can't help but look back on since we've been doing this Maple Pill for 30 episodes now is just how fast things have evolved. It literally feels like we live in a different version of Canada compared to 30 days ago. And I can't help but look at how the government has reacted to this entire trucker convoy protest and find myself really losing faith in our institutions and administration. Now, again, I didn't have a lot of faith in it to begin with, but certainly it's continuing to deteriorate. I'm not even sure if I've got any faith left in the system. I think that that's worth highlighting here because, again, I don't think it even matters whether you support the truckers and you're 100% behind them and you think that, Trudeau is a lizard person that maybe right now is munching on a baby, or if you think that the truckers are the evilest people of all time and this is the greatest emergency Canada's ever experienced, that this is even, the War of 1812 doesn't even come close to comparing to what's occurring right now in our nation's capital. Honestly, I don't even think it really matters, but we are seeing a huge civil division break out here in Canada. I've heard a lot of people comparing it to a proxy war, right? A proxy battle, essentially, between the cultural civil war that's occurring in the United States. I'd love to hear your thoughts and your opinions on the subject matter. But I can't help but look back over these last, 3 weeks at this point in time and think about how we started off with this being a fringe minority of people that the mainstream media and politicians were making fun of and essentially didn't even believe was worth giving the time of day to seriously consider it. And now we're literally implementing the Emergencies Act. We're seeing people arrested today. And yesterday we're seeing journalists pepper sprayed, old people being trampled by horses. And based upon the government's reactions to the trucker convoy now, this is arguably the greatest emergency in Canada's history, at least since 1970s with the FLQ. And again, this is just a wild time to be alive. You're essentially understand by implementing the Emergencies Act, they're stating that this is the greatest crisis Canada's experienced in the last 50 years. That's a big and bold statement. And I can't help but feel like we are watching a cultural civil war break out. And I can't help but wonder what comes next. Again, I've been wildly impressed by the protesters and how calm, cool, and collected they've been, how non-violent they've actually been, despite the mainstream media's desire to paint them as being extremely violent. And in addition to that, understanding the fact that they've got the Prime Minister of Canada that's completely unwilling to even open dialogue, or at this point in time, I'm not sure if he even considers them human. It literally seems like he believes that they're just not worth dealing with whatsoever. But anyways, we've got a lot of stories to cover, so I'm going to jump into it. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions. Let me know in that comment section. And there's links in the video description down below to just about everything we're going to talk about tonight. There's a couple quick updates I saw on Twitter that I wasn't able to get into my video description. So again, I'll let you know when we come across those. But before we even get into the trucker updates and the Emergencies Act update, I did want to highlight this from National Post. So a couple days ago, I believe, in one of my Black Pill segments, we were talking about the Thetrudeau Foundation and the allegations that essentially the Thetrudeau Foundation controlled 40% of a pharmaceutical company that provided a key component to making COVID-19 vaccinations. This article is from the National Post, and they're saying, no, the Thetrudeau Foundation doesn't own a firm supplying Pfizer COVID vaccines. The charge has been reposted tens of thousands of times on social media, with some writers accusing Justin Trudeau of personally profiting. And so, as I highlighted in this week's Black Pill earlier on in the week, we saw Dr. Malone stating this. We saw a Dr. I forget his first name, but Dr. something Martin, who was an economist. And we weren't really seeing a lot of facts, right? And I believe I mentioned that to you guys right off the hop that, this was an accusation, but we really didn't have a smoking gun or any proof. And so the National Post actually reached out to the company that it's claimed that the Trudeaus or the Thetrudeau Foundation controlled. And they stated and showed their essentially like the ownership documents showing that the Trudeaus as well as the Thetrudeau Foundation doesn't have a stake in the company, as well. The CEO, I believe, stated that as well. So again, if you guys want to dive into that further, I just want to be very clear here. This is a net positive, in my opinion, right? I think that Occam's razor at this point in time would state that with very little probability is it going to turn out that Trudeau actually owns a stake in this, because I can't see the National Post wanting to put together an article that down the road could be actually proven false if it ended up being that. So again, want to be very clear here. I appreciate when, mainstream media actually does some investigative journalism and gets to the bottom of things. And again, my entire goal with this show is just the pursuit of truth, transparency, and authenticity. So, in my humble opinion, this makes a lot of sense. It passes the sniff test. So, again, that's one conspiracy we can put on the shelf as not being valid, barring like some crazy information breaking. So, again, link to this article in the video description down below. I always want to try and provide you guys with the best information possible while taking you on the journey from blue pill to red pill to black pill to clown pill, and then finally ending with the white pill. So again, just wanted to kind of give you guys an update on that. Now let's move on to the updates in regards to the trucker protests and what's going on in Ottawa. And these next two Twitter posts I've got here, they're not going to be in the video description down below, but you can actually see the URL way up there. If you really want to jump into it. But essentially, this is from K2 on Twitter, and this is just a clip of I assume it's the RCMP or police on horseback, essentially running into the protesters.
Come on through. Come on through. What is happening here? Wow. What is this lady doing? Trampling. Trampling horses. Trampling. Stop it. Stop it. Oh my God. Oh my God. They just trampled this lady. They just trampled that lady. They just fully trampled that lady. They just fully.
So again, if you guys want to check it, you can find it on Twitter. There was also this overhead shot where you can see that at least from sources I've seen, this was an elderly lady. You can see her walker here as well, and the horse is kind of running through and stampeding on the protesters. This is not good. Again, regardless of how this plays out, this is a sign, I think, that both sides of the arguments are going to take to justify their positions, right? For the truckers, again, like it really feels like this was an unprovoked attack by the police, or at least from my perspective. We saw several arrests occurring. Again, there's different reports. At least it sounds like 20 people, upwards of maybe even 70 or 100 people, depending upon the sources you turn to. But yeah, this is Canada in 2022. It was 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Now we're more than 2 years essentially into this fiasco, and we've got arguably martial law with the government freezing bank accounts with no proof and forcing financial institutions to do their bidding, while we have police literally trampling people in the streets. I'm not impressed. Sorry, I'm trying not to be too black-pilled, at least on the start here. So this is from True North. I believe they're doing some of the best coverage in regards to recapping what's going on day by day in regards to the Freedom Convoy. So again, encourage you guys to check it out, but we're going to keep rolling. So this to me is a really big black pill and a big deal. This is from the National Post, but you can find it in all the mainstream media sources. Speaker cancels Emergencies Act debate on Friday due to police operation. Ottawa police have begun a sweep of protesters who have occupied the city core for weeks. And so literally, it's hard for me to not believe that this is essentially circular logic. The government was supposed to vote today on whether the Emergencies Act was appropriate. And essentially, if the minority Liberal government didn't get backing from the NDP or the Bloc, they wouldn't be able to actually push this through. And yet here we are on the day where we're going to find out, and they decide to move in and start arresting people. And again, if you want to be blackpilled on this, when the government or corporations want to do something bad, they always do it or release the news on a Friday because they know the average person's going to be paying less attention and more distracted because a lot of people are working for the weekend, sadly. They're caught up in that rat race. And when looking at this, to understand that we were supposed to get the vote today, but now it's going to be pushed till next week. And we're also in Family Day here in Ontario. So my understanding is now it's going to be Tuesday before this is actually looked at. So this essentially gives the government 4 more days to do as they wish under the Emergencies Act before we even have Parliament voting on whether it's appropriate to enact the Emergencies Act. Again, I think we should all be concerned about this because even if you don't agree with the truckers, understand that someday you're going to be on the other end of these rules and these new precedents that are being set in our country. And again, even for those of you that aren't Canadian, understand that it's hard for a lot of us, at least, to not look at this as a trial run for other G7 or other G20 countries, other Western democracies as well. So again, I encourage you guys to go read it, look at the source information here. Now from the CBC, Freeland defends arrests of protesters, says Canada's democracy and economy are under threat. I would argue that for the last 2 years, our democracy has been under threat and our economy has been under threat. Not due to truckers or protesters, but literally due to the mandates, the rules, the restrictions the government's implemented, as well as their complete mismanagement of this entire health situation, right? Understand that we spent hundreds of millions of dollars, and we've covered this in some of the first episodes of the Maple Pill, on emergency field hospitals, some of which still haven't been delivered, and yet have never seen a single patient. Whereas here in Ontario, currently, we essentially have the same number of ICU beds as we did when we started the pandemic. It's wild to think that we're 2 years into this, and essentially we've made almost no progress. This is from Zero Hedge. Heavily armed Ottawa police arrest at least 70 Freedom Convoy protesters, will run 24 hours a day to clear city. They've got some great source videos here. We've got Viva Fry as well. If you guys haven't been following along with Viva Fry and you want to really see what it's like on the ground firsthand, I think his live stream's the best that I've seen. I'm also just a fanboy of what he's doing in general. And, you know, he put out a tweet earlier today stating he's been there now, I think, for I forget whether he said like 14 or 21 days in total. Because I think he commutes back and forth. He's originally from Montreal. But he said he's never seen any violence until today with the police. And I'm definitely hearing other people on social media stating that as well. So again, lots of great source videos here. I encourage you guys to check out. But I did want to highlight essentially this meme that was posted. So peaceful, we've got a city burning down. We've got stunning, which is statues being toppled. We've got brave with more fire and more mayhem. And then we've got terrorism, and it's a group of truckers playing hockey on the road. Now, this is from the Toronto Sun. Liberals cite CBC analysis to justify freezing bank accounts. So understand a large part of this Emergencies Act and what's being implemented to justify freezing bank accounts, actually, it doesn't come from the RCMP, doesn't come from CSIS, right? The Canadian Security Intelligence Services. It's literally coming from a CBC article and 3 reporters from the CBC that are using the leaked hacked information from GiveSendGo and are essentially doxing people. So the incredible powers that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has given his government to freeze people's bank accounts is based on their reliance on analysis from the CBC. And this article is definitely worth reading from start to finish, but I'm just going to highlight some key points for you guys. While constitutional law experts and civil liberties groups have said the threshold has not been met for the government to invoke the act, the 14-page document the Liberals offered up presents their own more formal argument to back them up. The actual facts presented are shockingly thin and are mostly a regurgitation of online news stories. It remains possible that the Trudeau government has evidence, such as intelligence reports of a credible national security threat within the Freedom Convoy, sufficient to justify invoking these extraordinary law. Aaron Woodrick, a lawyer who works with the Macdonald Laurier Institute, wrote in a recent guest column, if they have such evidence, they should immediately make it clear publicly. And it's hard for me to not be blackpilled on this and think that the government purposely enacted these arrests and the police action today so that they could have a few more days to either try and gather information or to have the narrative flip further into their favor, in the hopes that they could agitate protesters into being violent or misbehaving. And that, again, if it turns out to be not supported by Parliament, that, hey, they'll have got their way anyways because they'll have had several days to implement it over this weekend. The document later circles back to, again, justify the financial measures, saying the importance of this measure is highlighted by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's recent reporting about the crowdfunding website GiveSendGo.com, which indicated that the majority of the donations to the protests were made by donors outside of Canada. That's it. No department reports underlying this assessment, no RCMP intel, nothing except a story put together by 3 CBC reporters. So go read the entire article. Now, this was from Brian Lilly. The regulations for Emergencies Act include a ban on protests under certain conditions unless you are Indigenous or a refugee. And this was interesting to me. And if there's a valid argument for this, I'd love someone to share it with me in the comment section. But essentially, here's the Toronto Sun article. So again, Emergencies Act regulations ban protests except for Indigenous or refugees. What the regulations do not do is explain why specific groups of people are exempted. Under the provisions of the Emergencies Act invoked by the Trudeau government, protests can be banned in certain areas for most people, but not for First Nations or refugees to Canada. Subsection 1 does not apply to A, a person registered as an Indian under the Indian Act, or B, a person who has been recognized as a convention refugee, the regulation states. Again, you would think during a national emergency that literally required us enacting the Emergencies Act, which has never been used before in Canada, that you wouldn't be separating people out based upon race or personal background in regards to whether they're allowed to protest. But I don't know. I'm kind of like fingers crossed on this. Maybe it'll turn out that a lot of Indigenous people will decide to support the truckers and show up, and it'll be interesting to see whether the police do anything to them. But what a strange timeline we live in. This is from the Calgary Herald. So this is war. Arrested Coots protesters say they were being provoked by RCMP. RCMP called the threat to their officers real and organized. So again, this is talking about the Coots 13, right? 13 or was it 11 that were arrested. 4 of them are still being held. 7 were released on bail, if I remember correctly. So again, if you guys just want to stay up to date, I think this is probably one of the better articles that goes deep into the details about the background and their political views and motivations and things of that nature. Now, this is from CTV News. Canadian Civil Liberties Association takes federal government to court over the Emergencies Act. And a quote here, the government has brought in extreme law that has never been used, and it announced emergency orders that will have sweeping consequences, said Noah Mendelson, AVI executive director of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, at a news conference Thursday afternoon. Orders that have passed outside of ordinary democratic processes. So again, good article if you just want to see exactly what the Civil Liberties Association is doing and why they're challenging the government. And again, Blacklock's reporter also had a great breakdown on it, so I wanted to share it with you guys. Now, this is just kind of a resource that I thought was worth checking out. So this is a fantastic Twitter thread that really just breaks down why it's so important to understand that the government being able to freeze your bank accounts to essentially stop you from transacting in society is in effect a complete attack on all freedoms, because it's difficult to have freedom of expression or freedom of religion or any other sort of freedom if you're not allowed to access your resources, right? Because things like having freedom of religion, well, if you want to get together and congregate, you need funds in order to have a building, in order to have access to facilities and things of that nature. So again, there's like 65 points to this thread. I'm not going to read it to you guys, but I really encourage you take some time and go check it out. But let's get into our first couple blue pill stories of the day. So your worker joined the convoy protest. Can you fire them? And this is just fascinating to see the narrative coming out of mainstream media and the desire to demonize every single person that donated to this peaceful protest. And we've already seen some government officials or like some government employees being fired for their they're daring to donate to the protesters. And understand that the vast majority of these people donated to the protests before the Emergencies Act was enacted, which means that it wasn't illegal until the government retroactively stated it. So this is the sort of thing where they're essentially punishing you now for like thought crime, for doing something wrong that at the time wasn't wrong, but after the fact they decided to make it so. This should be concerning again to every single person, regardless of your political stripe. Now from Toronto Sun, polls show Canadians losing faith in country. It's not just the protests and those behind them shaking faith. It's the way politicians have handled this. And honestly, if there's a single Canadian that believes that the politicians have handled this correctly, I need what you're smoking, because these days I'm finding myself more and more black-pilled, and it would be nice to have a respite from it. So, hook me up. But quote here from the article, the poll found that 66% fear for the future of Canada, while 62% say they have lost faith in the ability of the country to keep peace, order, and good government in place. Those fearing for the future of Canada live in Quebec, where 69% feel that way. They're followed by all three prairie provinces, where that sentiment is held by 68% compared to 66% in British Columbia, 64% in Ontario, and 58% in Atlantic Canada. Just more than half of Canadians, 52%, believe the country is beyond broken, and that it's just not viable in the way it is currently constituted and being governed. That sentiment is highest in Alberta at 66%, followed by Quebec at 54%. And so we've touched upon this with a few other articles as well. Yesterday, we were talking about how 78% of people under the age of 35 believe that unless something's done, or if we continue to see a concentration of wealth amongst the elite, that we're going to see some sort of class conflict break out here in Canada. And again, the Toronto Star in this case, who wrote the article yesterday, dictated that this was all due to misinformation and essentially the under 35 crowd, not being able to separate fact from fiction. I can't help but feel that it's almost the exact opposite interpretation, where the under 35 crowd is smart enough to actually go to multiple sources and then try and figure out what the real story is versus what narrative is being presented to them. Continuing to roll on here. Now we're going to get into a couple red pill stories. Actually, we've got a lot of red pill stories. And the first one here, if you guys didn't hear about this, I don't blame you, because it really wasn't getting nearly the same sort of attention as what's going on with the trucker protest. But millions in damage after attack on coastal Gaslink worksite, RCMP say. It was reported that approximately 20 people, some armed with axes, were attacking security guards and smashing their vehicle windows, police said in their release. Police said several people threw smoke bombs and fire-lit sticks at officers as they made their way through the debris. One officer was injured, Mountie said. When police arrived at the drill pad at the 63-kilometer mark, they found significant damage had been done to heavy machinery, fencing, and portable buildings, RCMP said. Police did not encounter any further blockades or protesters as they made their way to the drill pad, nor did they locate anyone at the site. Further on, this was a calculated and organized violent attack that left its victims shaken in a multi-million-dollar path of destruction. While we respect everyone's right to peacefully protest in Canada, we cannot tolerate this type of extreme violence and intimidation. Our investigators will work tirelessly to identify the culprits and hold them accountable for their action. Coastal Gaslink also issued a statement Thursday describing the attack in greater detail than the RCMP did. The attackers also wielded axes, swinging them at vehicles and through a truck's window. Coastal Gaslink said flare guns were also fired at workers. Workers fled the site for their own safety and remained shaken by the violent incident. Fortunately, there were no physical injuries to Coastal Gaslink workers, although later on in the article, they do state that one RCMP officer was injured. Now, what I find really interesting is how little the CTV News and the rest of the mainstream media shared in regards to photos of this, right? So we've got a video here that we can play, and then we've got one photo. But if you actually jump over to the company that experienced this, you can see they actually tried to make this very easy for the media, where they literally uploaded photos of all the different damage and destruction that was caused, even highlighting one of the weapons or axes that was used, showing the trucks and their damage as well, and literally making it super easy where you can download the image. And then just wanted to highlight one point here they made on their website. And one of the most concerning acts, an attempt was made to set a vehicle on fire while workers were inside. The attackers also wielded axes, swinging them at vehicles and through a truck's window. Flare guns were also fired at workers. Workers fled the site for their own safety and remained shaken by the violent incident. So again, it's just interesting because it feels to me like the mainstream media either was too busy focusing on the truckers or they're purposely trying to downplay this. From post-millennial, breaking, axe-wielding mob violently attacks pipeline work site in northern BC, 1 officer injured. Now, again, I can't help but feel like had this been the truckers that did this, we would see headlines like the post-millennial sharing here in mainstream media, or even more extreme headlines in the mainstream media, versus the way CTV News presented it, talking about the millions in damage rather than talking about the attacks on the employees. So again, link to the post-millennial article in the video description down below. This is from the National Post. And this is actually from a while ago, right? So David Suzuki has been essentially talking about violence, and while he will never state he condones violence, if you read between the lines on his message, it seems like he promotes a lot more violence than anything we've heard from the trucker convoy. So pipelines will be blown up, says David Suzuki, if leaders don't act on climate change. It is now the age of consequences. Extinction Rebellion organizer tells protesters in Victoria. Critics called the statement dangerous and reckless. I encourage you to read the entire article, but just want to highlight a few points here. So asked whether or not he would support the bombing of pipelines, Suzuki said, of course not. He continues, though. The violence is coming from the authorities, from government, from the RCMP, said Suzuki. They're declaring war against those that are protesting. So that's interesting, that they're declaring war against the protesters related to climate action. But what we're seeing here from the trucker protests in Ottawa and at the borders is a measured, reasonable response, according to politicians and those on the left. Still, Suzuki warned he feels that there are few remaining options for protesters who feel government isn't moving rapidly enough to tackle climate change. What else is there but violence, he wondered. Could you imagine if one of the trucker convoy literally said that to the press directly? I feel like we would see such demonization and calls for their heads immediately well, it probably doesn't surprise you guys, and it doesn't surprise me. But this is from Rebel News, again, just kind of highlighting some of David Suzuki's comments. Encourage you guys to check it out. And then this is from Blacklock's reporter. Briefing notes show Cabinet ruled 2020 First Nations blockades of rail, bridges, and ports were exercises of important democratic rights, part of reconciliation. So again, link to that tweet in the video description down below. But when First Nations people do it, it's part of the important democratic rights when they shut down key infrastructure. But when truckers do it, you know, they're racist, misogynist, and they're domestic terrorists. Now, let's get into some black pills. And this one's a real doozy, in my opinion. Trans Mountain releases new estimate for TMX. The total project cost has increased from 12.6 to 21.4 billion. Seems kind of substantial. So this article from the CTV News, cost of Trans Mountain pipeline expansion soars 70% to 21.4 billion. Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland said Friday that Trans Mountain Corporation, the Crown Corporation that owns the massive oil pipeline, will need to secure third-party funding to complete the project, either through banks or public debt markets. I want to assure Canadians there will be no additional public funding for TMC, Freeland told reporters in Ottawa, adding the government has engaged BMO Capital Markets and TD Securities to provide financial advice on the project and has been assured by both parties that the project remains commercially viable. Yeah, that's interesting because the people that originally owned the pipeline sold it to the government for what was it, like 4.5 billion, because they believed it wasn't commercially viable. Now the government goes in with a $12 billion budget, which ends up almost doubling or increasing by 70%, but it's still somehow going to be commercially viable. Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. In fact, I'm willing to make a prediction here. I predict that we'll see the government eventually offload this to the private sector at pennies on the dollar compared to what we invested as from the public purse or from taxpayer money. The federal government has said all along that it does not intend to be the long-term owner of the project, a position restated by Freeland Friday. She said the government will launch a divestment process later this year. And understand this is part of a much bigger narrative. We're at the point in crony capitalism where all losses are essentially made public, right? As in, like, they're forced upon the public in order to bear those, right? So they become a social cost, whereas all gains are privatized. So the government goes in, starts this crazy project that the original owner said wasn't going to be commercially viable, so they sold it to the government. The government then goes way over budget, tells us, oh, don't worry, we'll somehow make it work. And I'm just saying right now, I predict that, probably around the end of 2023, assuming I'm still doing this show and I'm allowed on the air, I'll be ranting and raving to you guys about how we sold it to a private entity, or a private entity absorbed it by essentially just taking on the new debt released in order to wrap up the project. But again, maybe I'm just a little too black-pilled. Moving on. This one is from Randy Hillier. And so this is literally a guy that was waving a flag by the side of the road or a highway, and he's being arrested. Because right now in Canada, waving a flag is essentially the equivalent to domestic terrorism, and you deserve to be arrested. Now, this is from the Toronto Sun. Woke British head teacher forces vegetarianism on pupils at schools. So head teacher Rachel Tomlinson writes her decision, including banning meat from lunchboxes and its cafeteria, was made in order to stop climate change. Now, remind me why you would ever want teachers to have this sort of power over your children, or why you would want woke individuals, social justice warriors, whatever you want to frame them as, to be able to have this power over your children. Not that I even support public school systems at this point in time, but if there's a case to be made for public school systems, it's in order to teach like reading, writing, and arithmetic. And let's leave all the other woke agendas up to the parents to decide whether they want to implement it. This one's from Blacklock Reporter. Admit, parents wary of vax. So recently some polls came out showing that parents are concerned about having their children vaccinated because there's really not a lot of data. But and I encourage you guys to read the whole article, but I just want to highlight the last point here. In Canada, there have been 120,487 COVID cases in children aged 5 to 11, wrote staff. Of these, 291 were hospitalized, of which 46 were admitted to intensive care units, and 2 cases resulted in deaths as of November 2021. So imagine, at one point in time, the narrative was they were going to literally start forcing children to need vaccine passports in order to participate in society, when 2 children have died so far in Canada of COVID. And what isn't stated is whether those children had comorbidities or whether they were, morbidly obese. Call me a suspicious person, but I suspect they either had 1 or 2 of those pre-existing conditions before actually dying from COVID. Now, this is from the Epoch Times. Canadian democracy weakened amid pandemic report. Economist Intelligence Unit survey highlights how the pandemic has emboldened China's challenge to Western democracies. Again, this is worth reading the whole thing, but just want to highlight a couple points here. Canada's citizens feel that they have little control over their lives, a sentiment that has been compounded by pandemic-related restrictions on individual freedoms, the report reads. Yeah, no shit. Okay, we're going to keep rolling, though. So, this one's a doozy, in my opinion. I've mentioned multiple times how we're sacrificing an entire generation of children on the altar of perceived safety. Well, just understand this. And if you're a parent, you need to pay attention. And if you know parents, you need to share this with them, because we need to immediately stop the masking of children. The CDC just quietly lowered the standard for speech in early childhood development. Now children should know approximately 50 words at 30 months rather than 24 months. Instead of highlighting the harmful effect masks and lockdowns have had on children, the CDC just lowered the bar for milestones. Yeah, let that sink in. But if that wasn't enough, this comes from the World Bank, which again, arguably is one of those NWO sort of organizations, but even they're admitting there's going to be a significant impact to future generations because of masking. Learning losses from COVID-19 could cost this generation of students close to $17 trillion in lifetime earnings. And just one of the quotes I wanted to hit upon, the COVID-19 crisis brought education systems across the world to a halt, said Jamie Savrda, World Bank Global Director for Education. Now, 21 months later, schools remain closed for millions of children, and others may never return to school. The loss of learning that many children are experiencing is morally unacceptable, and the potential increase of learning poverty might have a devastating impact on future productivity, earnings, and well-being for the generation of children and youth, their families, and the world's economies. Yeah. Again, I think anyone with more than 2 brain cells throughout this pandemic would have been able to come up with that conclusion. But it's nice that, like 2 years in, we're actually finally starting to wonder. I wonder if there's unintended consequences to all these public policies we're implementing. This one here, I'm sorry, I've got a lot of red and black pills today. This one's from Twitter. Refusing a COVID test in New Zealand may lead to a warrant for arrest, suspended driver's license, property and financial seizure, bad credit, a restriction on selling property, and travel prevention. Literally, New Zealand is essentially China, it appears, at this point in time. And they've got a copy here of a notice of a court fine because an individual refused a COVID test. Yeah, the social credit system's already here. This one, again, this is dark. This is from Andy No. This is so wild. Facebook Meta manager of community development, Jaron A. Miles, was allegedly caught in an amateur child sexting. YouTube channel Predator catches Indianapolis, live stream their interrogation of him. Read my breaking report. So I'm going to play this clip for you. And
so you're telling this 13-year-old boy that he makes you horny, correct?
Could be perceived as such, yes.
Oh, quit the bullshit, bro. I'm sick of your bullshit.
Good. I won't have any restraint around you if I'm horny. What does that mean?
It means I was flirting. I was talking to him. Throughout all of this, I'll let you know there was never any intention of ever meeting up with him.
Okay.
Bro.
But you did set 2 meets with him.
That I never intended to go to or
But you set it up
to.
Correct?
And I gave information, location, and all that stuff. Yes.
I mean, how did I find you? It's not like I just pulled this out of my ass.
It's true.
You gave the hotel and the hotel room.
Right.
So you set the meets. So you're okay with talking sexual online as long as you don't meet the children?
This is the one time I've done this.
The only time. Okay, so you are okay to talk sexual to 13-year-old Corey because you knew in your head that you would not meet up with him.
That was my rationale.
Okay. He asked you what you do. I am the head of a global community development for Meta. That's a pretty fucking good job, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Huge, right? You make good money, right?
What was the title again?
I mean, what is your official title?
Manager of Community Development.
And you said, make out with you, touch you, suck you.
all right, I'm going to stop it there or else I'm literally going to have my blood boiling. If you guys want to watch the full clip, I encourage you to do so. Link in the video description down below. A few things that stand out to me about this, though, is just how cool and collected he is for being someone that was literally caught in a sting, essentially trying to solicit from a 13-year-old boy. And, like, this psychopath, I don't know what else to call him, this psychopath, it just so calm in it. Now, it appears that Facebook and Meta have let him go subsequently. There are rumors that a former Hillary Clinton staffer is now essentially, or was previously, trying to squash this story from going public. I'll leave you guys to go down your own rabbit hole in that. Again, that's just more of a rumor at this point. Post Millennial has an article on it. I encourage you guys to check it out if you want to get deeper into it. It also has his LinkedIn. And here's the bit about he was actually involved with a Boys and Girls Club in Winnipeg. Yeah, I just personally, I'm extremely concerned about what I see as the normalization of sexualizing minors. This seems to be something that's very rampant in our society, and we all need to be more vigilant in regards to this fucking bullshit. Now, let's hit upon, this is from the Mises Institute. Canada nice no longer. Trudeau's totalitarian response to trucker protests. So, given these circumstances, It is clear that Trudeau is scrambling for a way to disregard the Freedom Convoy's demands while also quashing the protests, or occupation as he calls it. In June 2020, Trudeau was pressed on then U.S. President Donald Trump's idea of using soldiers against protesters and rioters. He responded, "We all watch in horror and consternation what's going on in the United States. It is clear that Trudeau was troubled by a heavy-handed approach to the Black Lives Matter protests and rioters. However, his response to the Freedom Convoy has been less sympathetic. In fact, he referred to the protesters as a fringe minority with unacceptable views. The Prime Minister fell into the same political trap as former U.S. President Barack Obama and former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Obama, Clinton, and now Trudeau can be depicted as out-of-touch elitists with contempt for those who hold contrary political opinions. For decades, politicians have deferred democratic decision-making to so-called experts and administrative agencies to shield themselves from political accountability, i.e. voter preferences. This long-term strategy has demonstrated a degree of contempt for the average voter. Trudeau has engaged in a similar sleight of hand by abusing the levers of government power to coerce financial institutions and payment service providers to conduct the business of the state. This is a really important point that I think a lot of people overlook, right? It's not just that the politicians are evil. I guess this is a little bit of my opinion, but in my opinion, it's not just that the politicians are evil. It's that the top individuals in the administration, right? The people that stay on, regardless of who's in power or who gets voted in or out, they're also more than just complicit in what's going on here right now. And the desire for politicians, we've seen this throughout the pandemic, to essentially shrug off any responsibility and say, hey, don't blame me. It's the medical experts. Hey, don't blame me. It's the health science table, right? Hey, don't blame me. There's probably no better case of this than what Doug Ford's been saying throughout, right? Where he's just like, anyone that would disagree with Moore, Dr. Moore would, they'd be lynched. They'd have their head taken off. So my hands are tied. I just have to listen to this unelected official and do whatever they tell me to do. No, motherfuckers. The reason that we actually have a democracy and vote people in is we want you to represent us, not simply be, the person constantly finding scapegoats or pointing to your neighbor and blaming them rather than taking responsibility yourself. Now, this is from the Ron Paul Institute. In the age of COVID, we're reminded an unjust law is no law at all. And this is important because I see so many people right now, particularly mainstream media and politicians, that are focusing on using that word illegal, right? Illegal protest. When we hear government officials or media pundits refer to something as illegal or unlawful, all this should really do is cause us to ask if the defense of these laws is actually prudent, moral, or necessary. Some laws are well-founded in basic protections of property rights and other human rights, but many laws are nothing more than the fruits of political schemes to help the regime maintain power or to reward its friends at the expense of others. We can always expect the regime and its supporters to try to outlaw things they don't like. And once such things are illegal, we'll hear all about the evils of the lawbreakers. Anytime those lawbreakers threaten the prestige or power of the regime, lawbreaking in favor of the regime, of course, is always tolerated. It's a highly successful trick they've been using for thousands of years. Yes, absolutely agree with that. All right, looks like we've got some spam going on here. I'm just going to block these spammers quick. And sorry about all the spam, guys, but that's just the way it is. And reminder, if you guys get me up to 1,000 subs on YouTube, I'll actually be able to implement different rules and restrictions to who gets to jump in the chat. But unfortunately, right now, I can't keep up with it. They just keep creating new accounts. And again, you can have restrictions once you're a larger account on who can jump in your live chats, but I can't do it because I don't have 1,000 subs. So let's move on. We've had enough black pills, I think, for the day. Let's hit upon a bunch of different clown pills. So this one literally feels like it should be in, the Babylon Bee. Foreign policy Canada. Canada condemns Cuba's harsh sentencing following the July 2021 protest. Canada strongly advocates for freedom of expression and the right to peaceful assembly. Free from intimidation, we stand with the people of Cuba and their aspiration for democracy. Yeah, this is coming from the Canada right now that they'll freeze your bank accounts without really any rhyme or reason. They're willing to threaten to take away your kids, threaten to kill your pets if you're incarcerated, and also just stomp you with their horses if you're an old lady with a walker. that's where we're at. Now this is from Stephen Punwazi. I thought this was great. 100% got it now. Canada is 5 banks, 3 telecom monopolies, 3 oil companies, 2 grocery barons, 4 real estate developers, 3 organized crime syndicates, 6 political dynasties, 2 housing bubbles, and 3 rich kids with political parties in a trench coat. Yeah, that essentially sums up all of Canada at this point in time. Is we're literally just a handful of oligarchs running our form of crony capitalism. Now, we do have some white pills, thankfully, for you guys today. This first one, this is amazing. I think technically this is breaking the law here, but we have a trucker receives $8,000 in Bitcoin on a live stream. And this really just did my heart good. Definitely worth the watch. And I appreciate everyone that's doing their part and following their moral and ethical compasses, regardless of what the government tells you. Now, this is from Paul Miller. So your bank account is frozen. This is the starter pack. You can go to bankaccountfrozen.com. And there's this handy one sheet that essentially explains to you how you can go about holding Bitcoin in a wallet that the government can't freeze, how you can convert that Bitcoin without having to use KYC on-ramps or off-ramps. So again, they talk about things like, buy gift cards with your Bitcoin and then use those gift cards to buy goods and services rather than trying to sell the Bitcoin on an exchange, which is likely going to freeze your address and probably down the road, they'll seize your money. And so again, here's just the link to the bankaccountfrozen.com. So I encourage you guys to check it out. I know a lot of people are new to the idea of Bitcoin and they're just starting to warm up to it. I also find that there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt spread, even sometimes in my own chat. And so I encourage you guys to go check out this resource in addition to the resources I've shared with you on the last handful of episodes. Now let's get into a couple of memes. So are you okay? No, I'm living in a country run by fucking clowns. This is literally me every single day. And I also want to share this one. So the media, when you pay Ghislaine Maxwell to have sex with a 15-year-old victim of human trafficking, completely blind to it. The media, when you donate $25 to some truckers, and they're going to be all up in your business, demanding statements and essentially demonizing you, your business, and, pushing the government to treat you like a domestic terrorist. So that's it for this Friday's episode. We'll jump into some chats in a second. Again, appreciate all of you guys that are sharing these videos on social media because we know big tech's going to do us no favors. I appreciate when you guys smash the like button and engage with the content by commenting on it. And a reminder, if you hate watching this on big tech, you can actually watch the replays on Rumble or on BitChute right now. I'd love your feedback. Should I, start investing money so essentially it costs money to go live on Rumble? Is that worth it? Will you guys start watching it on Rumble? Because right now I'm lucky if I get 10 views on Rumble. Should I be looking to, go on to other paid platforms like Gab? Are you guys on Gab? You can find me on Gab at Matt McKeever 85. Right now I'm mainly just a lurker, but again, as I see more people potentially join it, I'll consider, getting deeper into it. But again, appreciate you guys. And let's jump into some of the chat. And otherwise, I hope your Friday's going well. And those of you that decide to make road trips this weekend to the city's capital, I wish you the best of luck. And again, you guys need to do whatever you believe is right. We've got Project LB52 in the chat. We've got Brandon. We've got JJ Clem. Trudeau is the biggest lot lizard. Project LB52. Want to have your voice heard in a new way? Get a custom song created to share your feelings about the state of the country and the world. Fight for the culture war. So Project LB52 is a NFT project I'm involved in. If you guys want to learn more, it's the last link in the video description down below. We've got Aislinn in the chat. JJ Clem. We the people are the greatest pandemic Canada has ever seen, and we will destroy the Liberal Party. I certainly hope that there's consequences for Justin Trudeau. That's not me trying to agitate or call for violence. I just literally think he should lose his job and he should become disgraced and a pariah in our society. Pastafarian2 says, considering joining the Citadel IRL. That's awesome, Pastafarian. If you guys are interested in learning more about what I'm doing with my Citadel here, and if you guys don't know what we're talking about, I essentially bought a old fishing and hunting resort up in the middle of nowhere, northwestern Ontario, and I'm looking towards, guiding it towards becoming an intentional community. Right now, there's 5 of us living here. We've got Kyle, who's recently moved to the area as well and bought a nearby hobby farm. We're starting to build deep relationships with other homesteaders and other individuals that are homeschooling and of kind of the prepper mindset. I'm not saying that you guys need to panic and immediately start preparing for the end of the world. But if I had to gauge, in my lifetime over the last, 30 plus years, it feels like it's more justified now than probably ever before. But again, that's just my humble opinion. And so if you guys want to learn more about what we're doing with the Citadel, link to the Problems for Profits Discord in the video description down below. It's a great community of like-minded individuals. Even if you decide not to move here or join us, again, maybe you can find other people in your local area that are also part of the Problems for Profits Discord. JJ says, you don't want to believe the mainstream media company wants to create a post that differs from the truth. No, I'm not saying that, JJ, because I definitely call lots of BS on the mainstream media. But what I'm saying is it just feels like, I assume we're talking about the Thetrudeau Foundation. It just feels like this would be such a flagrant foul that could easily be fact-checked if those documents were to ever be leaked about who controls the pharmaceutical company. So again, I think at this point in time, Occam's razor dictates that we assume until there's valid proof presented, because right now, otherwise, you're really just going on hearsay and rumor, in my opinion. Benjamin says, the house of cards has to fall, and it seems like it's starting to become more unstable day by day, thanks to all the truckers. Definitely don't disagree with you, Benjamin. Sawyer says, watching the unlawful use of force by the police attacking peaceful people today is like watching the rise of the Fourth Reich in real time. Yeah, I understand the comparisons. And again, it seems like we're on a very slippery slope. And if we're not careful, and if our politicians don't start acting with real authenticity, start becoming transparent, start actually being truthful, we could find ourselves in a very terrible situation here in Canada and North America in general. I've commented on this multiple times. I'm not the only one kind of chatting about this, obviously, but it does feel like we're in the middle of a cultural civil war. And as we continue to see the mainstream media and politicians double down on their narrative, and we continue to see, brave citizen journalists going out there and actually documenting rather than necessarily just focusing on narrating what's going on, I can't help but feel like both sides are going to continue to find themselves further and further apart. And while even sometimes I may refer to this as a left and right thing, I think that that's probably a disservice overall. I think what we're really dealing with is a status and individualist mindset, right? We've got individuals that believe in sovereignty and freedom and the right to choose, right? And then we've got status that believe for the greater good, right? Any sacrifice can be justified. The means can the end can always justify the means, and that shit definitely is very concerning in my opinion. We've got Sawyer in the chat. The people are protesting us abusing our power by violating their human rights. Let's abuse our power to make it legal to violate their human rights. That's tyranny. Yep, I don't disagree. Peter says, what's the point in protesting peacefully for our rights in the future when it's clearly evident our government doesn't listen? And this is one of the biggest mishandlings throughout all this, right? Is the hubris, is the ego that Justin Trudeau has had on display from day one with his contempt of anyone that disagrees with him. And honestly, I'd love to get your thoughts and opinions in the comment. Do you think that he just lives in such an echo chamber that he literally believes that anyone disagrees with him has to be evil? Or do you think he willingly knows and just doesn't give a shit? Neither one of those is really a white pill there, but I'd love to get your guys' personal opinions. Let me know. Peter says, they are basically saying if you don't get violent, then it will be treated like a joke. It's hard to not interpret that. And I forget who has this saying, and it's, constantly posted on social media, but those who make peaceful protest impossible, I'm paraphrasing here now, but essentially force violent protest, right? And it certainly feels like the government is trying to do everything possible to egg on the protesters to make a mistake and become violent or agitated so they can enforce even more draconian rules and they can paint themselves as saviors. And again, I've said this multiple times now on the show, but I am just so impressed with the Canadian population that's standing up and speaking out, how reserved they've been, how peaceful they've been, how unwilling to take the bait when constantly you've got politicians demonizing you. And then when the only time even a handful of politicians will support you is when they believe it's politically expedient. But then again, the moment the Emergencies Act is enacted, all of a sudden, most of them went mum on the subject, right? They all of a sudden lost their tongue, lost their backbone. And yeah, the parasite class, the political class, they just don't care about the average person. I don't know how else to interpret things. Aislinn says, is anyone else wondering if the Convoy is a honeypot? I mean, you can go down that rabbit hole, and certainly I wouldn't be surprised to learn that there's aspects of it, or individuals that would be embedded in the movement. But personally, I see too many Canadians participating and too many Canadians being peaceful to think that it's really a honeypot. But again, anything's possible. I think the government, when given their druthers, are literally capable of anything. But I personally think it's a lower probability than it just being a grassroots movement that's actually has a lot of people that are really fed up with what's going on in Canada. JJ says, Matt McKeever Unfiltered, anyone that isn't white is legally allowed to protest because they don't want 20 million white people to start protesting. You give minority rights, they won't stand with the majority. That's the case. I would personally put it more likely towards that literally the government just, I'm sure at least in some of the government's administration's mental framework, they believe that the First Nations, Indigenous people should be treated differently. And honestly, this is a bad thing overall, right? Like, you can't have two classes of citizens. And now I'm not trying to say that they're creating two classes of citizens right now in this moment, but certainly, again, we're inching towards that direction. We see this, in Israel and Palestine, right? Like a state within a state. We've seen this literally with just First Nation reserves here in Canada, and then in Canada, right? Like this idea that you can have a state within a state but not have complete equal rights by both parties, it just creates disparities and wild unintended consequences that ends up devastating one part of the population. Again, that's my opinion, but I don't think it's necessarily that controversial. Aislinn says, there's a double-edged sword that goes with citizenship. The Emergencies Act is an example of the controls you are trading in exchange for the pros, which are dwindling daily. Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure what the refund policy is, but maybe we should all speak to the manager and find out if we can just get a refund. And if I'm going to be demonized, I mean, can I at least not have to pay taxes? If you're going to ostracize me from all society, can I at least have the benefit of not having to pay taxes, or at least be allowed to leave this country on an airplane? Paul says, thanks for your oversight. Appreciate it, and appreciate you guys that support this show, because again, while we may be a fringe minority, it's nice to know that we're not alone here. And in fact, I suspect we're not as fringe and we're not as small as they'd like to make us out to be. But I do understand that especially pre the trucker convoy, it was very easy to feel alone, very easy to feel isolated, very easy to get caught up in a fear and just panic sorts of mindset. And I believe that's what literally whoever you want to define as they, whether it's the lizard people, whether it's just politicians, whether it's good intentioned administrators that just have unfortunate consequences, they want that. They want us to be divided. They don't want us to have grassroots movements. They don't want us to know our neighbors and build strong social bonds in local communities. And I can't help but feel like we're seeing them overplay their hand right now in this moment in time in Canadian history. Shane says, it's a good peek at what a social credit system would look like, especially under Trudeau. Don't like the government, better suck it up or you'll get crushed. Yes, I completely agree with that. And we need to be so vigilant when it comes to social credit system. I know some will claim that we essentially already have one because we've got credit scores, but certainly we could see far more nefarious and far more heavy-handed implementations of those things. And right now it feels like we're on a trial run of it in Canada as well. It seems like they're on a trial run in Australia and New Zealand as well. And we need to hold our politicians accountable more. I recently just shared on my Instagram stories a post from the National Post from a few years ago that shows the donations, the Thetrudeau Foundation. And it's really weird. Essentially, like almost no money was donated to the Thetrudeau Foundation until 2013. And then you see this huge spike. And what happened in 2013? Oh yeah, that's when Justin Trudeau started being the leader of the Liberals. And then there's a massive spike in 2015. What happened in 2015? Oh yeah, that's when he became prime minister. Oh, and that 2015 donations, in 2015, that's when more than 50% of the donations came from foreign donors. Interesting. Alliston says, I'm planning my exit from Canada. I don't blame those of you that decide that you need to get out while the getting's still allowed. At the same time, I don't think that that's the only option for Canadians. I think that we could potentially see the tide shift here. We could see freedom return, at least to a certain degree or extent, or maybe I'm just trying to trick myself into that. Man, this love face is persistent in regards to spamming my chat. And all of a sudden now I'm not even able to block them. Well, that's no good. But Paul says CBC gets 1.4 billion a year of our tax money, so it is no wonder that they back our crime minister. I haven't heard someone actually call him that, but I like it. We've got Elizabeth. New Zealand turned into China because their PM was also a WEF young global leader. At least there isn't snow in New Zealand, though. Absolutely. Actually, I'm going to be, hopefully this weekend, putting together a special episode of the Maple Pill that, fingers crossed, will come out next week. I finally got Chrystia Freeland's book called Plutocrats, which was on the World Economic Forum and the Davos crew. But this was before she was in politics. And so I look forward to diving deep into this. I've also got like 40 tabs on her and her relationships to the World Economic Forum. So we're going to be going down some rabbit holes in the near future. But anyways, I'm going to wrap up here. Appreciate all you guys engaging and sharing in the chats and supporting me and what we're doing here. There was a lot of chats going on. So again, I really do appreciate when you guys share your thoughts and perspectives. Actually, you know what? I'll give a couple more here. We've got Daniel saying divide and conquer. Absolutely. And that's why outside of politicians and the parasite class, we need to be careful about demonizing the other side. Because I think that there's a lot of Canadians that are honestly just completely ignorant to what's going on. They hear one CBC news article read out on the radio, or they are exposed to a handful of headlines, and they don't have the time or the interest to dive deep into it. So again, we need to be careful because we don't want to become them. Mike Quigley says, a fringe group of Canadians have decided to join the TTT. Trudeau's tyrannical taunts became a member today. Interesting. We've got Rosalia. Hey, Matt, I got my book, Willful Blindness, today. That's awesome. And I want to encourage every one of you that want to understand more about how corrupted our politicians are, how corrupted our financial institutions are here in Canada. Willful Blindness by Sam Cooper is an excellent introduction. It's the book I've given away the second most amount of copies of in my entire life. And Basmatics is literally running over grandmas with horses, literally. Yes, it is wild. And Graham says, move to the Citadel. We have snowmobiles and sovereignty. Absolutely. And again, it's important for us to all remember we're actually freer than they want us to believe. Don't allow them to create a mental prison that you exist in, right? I took a selfie and shared it earlier this week of me going to CIBC to withdraw a bunch of cash without a mask, right? And again, understand that for the first year of the pandemic, essentially I was just very low conflict. I would, I would just order my groceries. I would just do everything to avoid having to wear a mask. But then when I was actually going out and, going to the bank or doing something like that, I would just put the mask on because it was the path of least resistance. And that was me essentially building a mental prison of my own. Because it turns out when you actually go out into society, most people aren't going to have the balls to confront you on this, right? And hell, I think half the people don't want to be enforcement officers anyways. And again, while I didn't highlight it in tonight's episode, we are starting to see some measures rolled back here in Canada. That is a promising step in the right direction, but we still need to be vigilant. We can't let our foot off the gas because, again, there's always going to be an excuse for another emergency where politicians can try and take away more of your freedoms, but we just need to hold the line. I appreciate you guys. Smash the like button, hit subscribe, all that good stuff. I'll be back on Monday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, same place. And again, really appreciate those of you that are standing up, speaking out, and holding to your morals and ethics. Let's play the intro, outro, and I'll see you on Monday.
asking blue pill, red pill, corporate press, I've had my fill. I'm just a simple chap, believing in my own will. Web fire, math, evil, scheming, this is